Yeah, we're here with Jack Jennings, and he's president of the Center on Education Policy in Washington. The center has just released a really interesting new report on the funding cliff that school districts across the country are facing this fall. Thanks for joining me, Jack.
Thank you.
Your new report puts a finger on what obviously is going to be a huge story for journalists covering education this year. What is the report's biggest takeaway for journalists who are covering schools at the state and the local level in the year ahead?
Well, the biggest takeaway is that there have been many stories about states cutting back on their education budgets. There have been some individual stories about librarians being laid off in this school district or that school district. So there's been pieces of the action. What we've tried to do in this report is to ask a nationally representative sample of school districts exactly what's happening in your school districts. And so we can say confidently, because of the size of the sample, because of all the statistical means we use, that this in fact is what's happening in school districts. And what's happening is that American school districts are now going into their third year of cutbacks. A substantial majority, two-thirds or more of American school districts had cutbacks in 2009-10, had cutbacks in 2010-11, and now are facing cutbacks in 2011 and 12. So American school districts are being squeezed through the budget cuts. And what this is going to mean, and it's being reported to us by school districts, is that teachers are being laid off by a majority of school districts, that teachers of basic academic subjects are being laid off by a majority of school districts. And this is going to mean that when parents send their kids to school this fall, there's going to be larger class sizes, there's going to be fewer librarians, there's going to be fewer assistants to help teachers and kids. School is going to be different this fall.
You know, Jack, in your report you mention a triple whammy for schools on the fiscal front. An end of much of their federal stimulus aid and the EduJobs money. Also, state aid is shrinking, and the local property tax revenues are also declining in many cases, or are under a lot of pressure because of falling home prices and foreclosures. Now, this sounds like a bleak picture, but to play devil's advocate a little bit, people do say in these kinds of times, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, that if you're really under the gun, you innovate and you think of new ways to do things that are more cost effective. What do you think about that line of argument?
Well, that's a good line of argument. We don't like to put out bleak reports. We generally don't like sad news reports. But unfortunately, this is a sad news report because this is what school districts are telling us. But you are right. If you are really pressed, you do things differently. You do things that you wouldn't have done otherwise. We don't know that from this report because we didn't ask that. We hope to do additional work that will find out what school districts can do that's different. But I don't think you're going to find many school superintendents or school administrators in the country who won't say that they've tried every way they can to mitigate the damage. Maybe they have to be pushed a little bit harder, but you know what that could mean? It could mean you have fewer school districts. It could mean that you go to TV more or to the internet more for classes instead of live teachers. There could be more drastic things that we have to do. And maybe we're getting to the point where we're going to have to do that just because it doesn't look like there's going to be money coming anytime soon.
Right. And I was really interested to see in the report, sort of speaking of doing things differently, that many districts were reporting that they were slowing down their reform efforts because of the budget squeeze. Right. And that surprised me somewhat in that it doesn't necessarily jibe with the narrative we're hearing about the big push from the U.S. Department of Education to spur reforms through Race to the Top and other competitive grant programs, and how state legislatures have been responding to that with changes. So what's the real story here? Are reporters missing something?
Partially, we're based in Washington, so what we hear is the Washington rhetoric. And the Washington rhetoric is that there's all sorts of reform that's coming about through Washington sent money. But this money is going to a minority of school districts. It's not going to the majority of school districts in the country. And so most school districts are not seeing Race to the Top money. They're not seeing innovation money. And now very few school districts have any of this stimulus money left. It's almost all gone. So for ordinary school districts, this talk about federal money isn't real.
Right.
It's not something that they're going to see. Some school districts will see it, but many won't. And states, when they cut back, you have governors that say, well, we're going to pass some tenure law reforms, and we're going to pass evaluation law reforms, and this is going to make education better. And then in the same bill or the budget bills, they cut back on spending for education, which means that the schools don't always have the money to carry out the evaluation reforms that the state legislatures have enacted. Because many of these new teacher evaluation reforms depend on increased testing, and they depend on observations of teachers in classrooms, which mean that you have to pay for master teachers to come in to observe teachers in classrooms. These reforms cost some money, and the state legislatures are passing reforms, and they're not providing the money to carry out the reforms.
Right. Well, Jack, I just wanted to kind of throw it open a little bit, because this is a confidential survey, so our members might not hear the kind of candid responses that you're getting from school districts. Is there anything that you got that folks are not talking about publicly that maybe is maybe being underreported in the media as a result?
Well, I think what's being underreported is the degree to which education is going to be harmed by these budget cuts, in the sense of the practicalities of what happens in a school. We were surprised because we do everything very scientifically. So we have scientific samples of school districts, and we're not a government agency, so we can't make school districts respond to our surveys. And we were hoping to get 350, 400 responses to these surveys. And we got over 450 responses, and they came in pretty fast. And I think the reason is that school people want the public to understand that they are facing 3 years of austerity now, that they have done about everything they can in the old book in order to blunt the effects of this austerity by buying textbooks, by delaying professional development, by delaying maintenance on buildings. Now they're cutting into teachers, they're cutting into counselors, and now they're cutting into the basic academics. They're laying off teachers of reading and math. So they're coming down to the core of education. Now, what this means is that there will be larger class sizes, there will be less assistance for kids. We hope that this isn't going to have an effect on education. We hope, but we don't know. But we certainly know that the reforms that are promising improvements in education are being delayed, or in some cases they're being eliminated entirely.
Right.
So I wish, we're again not into bad news. We issue publications called The Good News About American Education. We like good news. We like the test scores to go up, and we issue reports about test scores going up. But unfortunately, we have to report what we're told, and school people are telling us it's not a good story.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jack. I know that this is a story that reporters are going to be coming back to throughout this coming year. I think they're going to be turning back to your report for good national context. And I just want to say, in general, the reports that come out of the CEP are really media friendly, and I just appreciate how well organized and how succinct they are and to the point. So I think that as people turn to this report, they should also look at the other reports you have available on the site. And again, I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Let me thank Diane Stark-Gretner and Nancy Kober, the authors of the report. I'm the conveyor of the news, but they're the authors of the report. And the other people who work here are just excellent, and they do a wonderful job.
Thank you very much, Jack.